It's a great pleasure to welcome to this panel three remarkable and accomplished guests who've travelled from the continent as well as from the US to be with us today. And we're going to be discussing the topic which is up behind us here of how to create value through corporate venturing and other strategies for innovation in increasingly disruptive times. And we've heard a lot about the disruption in the last couple of days, and you only have to open a newspaper to realize that there's a lot of change going on to established industries as well as new industries. So you can read about their credentials, their accomplishments in the material, but I guess very quickly wanted to introduce them. Firstly, Lana Glansman, who's head of corporate marketing and innovation at Estee Lauder, the global beauty company, and you're based in Paris. Secondly, Bruce Dines, who's VP of Global Venturing for Liberty Global, based in Colorado, and that's a fascinating business which we're going to get into in terms of how they've handled disruption systematically over many, many years, in fact. And then last but not least, Thomas Beer, who is VP of Global Venturing for Head of Global Strategy and Innovation at the RWE, the German energy conglomerate, which is being buffeted significantly, not just by regulatory disruption, by consumer disruption and technology disruption. So I'd like to start with you, Thomas. Your industry is under enormous threat of disruption at the moment. And I'm interested, what approaches do you use to keep abreast of this disruption? And can you give an example?
Yeah, I mean, as you just said, we are in the midst of a heavy disruption of the old business model, which is, let's say, that of the integrated utility. And you probably have heard about the structural measures that we undertake ultimately to cope with that. The disaggregation of the company, splitting up the company and forming what we call, let's say, the fit for survival newco, which can be the utility which has a perspective to contribute to energy transition also in 20 or 30 years, consisting of renewables, grid, and retail business. Now, the question is, what are the next black swans? What are the disruptions which are ahead of this particular piece of the business? And we see, along with technological trends, along with digitalization, along with trends like the Internet of Things, of the sharing economy, consumers striving to become prosumers, to become, let's say, self-suppliers, and arising, let's say, ideas of peer-to-peer networks where customers supply customers, and by and large, overall, a huge further growth of the renewables in the systems, which means more electricity in the system in absolute terms, and ultimately a strong call for more digitalization in the system, because you cannot, let's say, run the system anymore with simply putting more copper in the ground. So the energy world is becoming more and more, let's say, intelligent, more smart, and there is a merger, as we say, the world of the bits and bytes and the world of the electrons. So we discovered this trend already a couple of years ago, and we formed the Innovation Hub in RWE 1.5 years ago, which is a bunch of young talents from our European operations, plus a lot of external hires. And we are searching for innovation, searching for new ideas for our future business models along certain lighthouses, thematic lighthouses, which is big data, disruptive digital, Internet of Things, and or home IoT, as we call it, and urban solutions. We are doing it from the places where we do our operations, but also from the outposts we are running, from the Silicon Valley, from Israel, and from Berlin and Birmingham, where we have university cooperation. Now, where does, let's say, venturing kick in? To accommodate the new ideas, to also give a kind of legal home at arm's length for the startups we find along that way, but also for the corporate startups that we carve out of our traditional business and set it, let's say, into the stiff wind of competition outside the company. We have founded a corporate venture fund, a strategic corporate venture fund, which has, let's say, a tenor of 10 years, volume of roughly 130 million euros. And that's where we put all the bits and pieces in which contribute to to the innovation.
Super, thank you. So Lana, you don't have a venturing unit in Estee Lauder, but you do have a lot of changes going on in the marketplace, one of which is the disruptive opportunity of millennials. Can you just say a little bit about why millennials is such a focus for your company? And then equally importantly, I mean, how do you actually begin to understand them and how do you begin to connect with their thinking and what it's doing for your marketplace?
Well, first of all, we are a portfolio of brands. We have about 30 brands in the company, and we operate in the luxury space. The reason we're so interested in millennials is that today they're 45% of luxury shoppers. And as we're in that space, they're a transformative force for us. So first of all, we distinguish between two types of millennials. So the millennials generation Y and also the generation Z, which is an extremely visual generation, and they're quite different. So in terms of understanding them, we do a lot of traditional ways of understanding them, from consumer research to market analysis to trend watches to co-creation with consumers, millennial consumers and product developers. But very importantly, it's important to change culture and mindset internally. So we actually have a millennial advisory board inside the company, and it's reverse sponsorship. So they actually advise top-level executives on how the world is changing, specifically in beauty. So again, multiple ways to be inspired by this transformative target in beauty.
And we'll come back to some of the challenges associated with that in a minute. But then finally, Bruce, to give you the word, I mean, Liberty started investing, set up a venture fund in the depths of the financial crisis. And I'm curious, I mean, how has Liberty Global evolved its venturing activities over that 9-year period, essentially?
There's so many ways. You know, we are living in a time of such rapid transformation and change. And it's always challenging for large corporations to find ways to keep up with that change. I love the idea that you have a millennial advisory board, because that's one of the topics I want to talk to. Is millennial behavior is so different that we've never seen a bigger difference across generations than we're seeing right now. One of the ways that we've expanded our venture practice, which we started in 2008 in sort of a traditional corporate venturing way. And by the way, I think the whole word corporate venturing needs to go. I think it should be replaced by team innovation. And my reason for that is also associated with the generational change that we're experiencing. You talk to a millennial about corporate, and it brings up images that are very negative. And the concept of venture is very traditional, and I think that needs to evolve and change. We've launched an accelerator in London. I was there yesterday afternoon meeting with the companies. They're coming to the end of their class, and they're getting ready to go make their pitch to our executives at Virgin Media as kind of a practice pitch and to keep our executives educated as to what's happening. And I had to help them understand that a hoodie is not a replacement for a collared shirt and a jacket. I had to help them understand that it will actually be rude if you text and Snapchat while you're listening to your colleagues give their pitch. So you know, how do we tap in to that change? And by the way, I love it because I have never experienced the amount of passion and energy and drive. I'm so inspired by the folks that have come through our program. But in the concept of team innovation, it's really, if you switch your paradigm, it's not really about doing deals. It's about viewing deals. And one of the reasons we launched our accelerator is we received more than 900 applications for 10 spots. So in literally a 3-month period of time, we were given visibility into the global landscape. We also leveraged the accelerator to create a much stronger brand awareness and brand affiliation and association with the millennial generation. We want to be perceived as a progressive and a current company, and there's no better opportunity to do that. So we really worked heavily with our branding team to create both sentiment change, association, and brand extension as a result of the program. So I mean, I could go on. I don't want to monopolize the time, but that's just one way that we are evolving our venture practice. We're also doing a ton of stuff around internal innovation, which I'm happy to talk to you later.
Okay. I mean, you touch on one of the fundamental challenges of what happens when you come back from the outposts of Silicon Valley or London and take these ideas back to the mothership, and how do you actually get people to sort of get religion and understand what's actually going on. I'm particularly interested from your point of view, Thomas, because you do represent a mature industrial conglomerate which is under enormous pressure, but you've also, I mean, the story of your business is you're creating a toxic, perhaps not a toxic necessarily, but certainly one asset which has got the old economy assets and liabilities, and another one which is far more future-based. How have you managed to change the executives' mindsets to embrace that way of thinking?
Well, I mean, the innovation initiative, our innovation hub, is let's say implemented into a huge change program, which was already kicked off in 2012, and where we routed let's say the top 1,500 managers through in the first place, following the idea that change starts from the top, or it doesn't start at all, where already a lot of innovation kind of working methods formed part of rapid prototyping, foraging groups and stuff like that. So that really paved the ground for innovation to a high extent. Nevertheless, there are antibodies in the company, no doubt about it, and the whole innovation hub needs to take place at the edges of the company. Very, very sure. On the other hand, you need ambassadors, you need champions of the operational business to implement. The rubber hits the road when it comes to the question: do we further on scale new ideas at the edges? Or do we, let's say, find the bridge into the operational business? You need champions for that, but you can also be, I mean, you can really enthuse also people from the operational business for that. Our philosophy, and there's also where our philosophy or our strategy for venturing kicks in. We say we only do investments into startups, or let's say in B or C rounds, if there is either a perspective for scaling up, let's say, a business at the edge of the company, or there is already a minimum viable product or a kind of proof of concept which found its way into the company. Give you an example, if I may. We just took an investment into a Silicon Valley-based company which is called Planet OS. And what those folks are doing, they develop algorithms, big data algorithms around tidal data, geodata, and ship movement data. And what we did, we brought these guys together with our operational team at Gwintimore Wind Farm, offshore wind park, which is the biggest one in Europe. And you could imagine that prior to this POC, you found operators sitting in front of 6 screens doing maintenance and operation of the wind parks, which can now be literally done from an iPad and lifting an NPV, which is a high double-digit euro million number, simply by applying algorithms of course, my turbine should be maintained tomorrow, but there is strong wind yield to be expected tomorrow. Let's do maintenance 1 week later when there is low wind expected. Or don't send the maintenance ship out. We are expecting heavy storms. It has to return anyway. Simple algorithms, high value, high impact to the business. As I said, double-digit million NPV, involvement into this young startup, a low $1 million figure. So that is strong ambassador for innovation also into the operation business. And what helps us really is success stories like this, which, however, then get spread by the operational guys, not by the innovators.
Yep. Now, Lana, I mean, part of the business model of Estée Lauder has been to build or buy brands and then scale them. And I'm curious, to what extent have you been able to using reverse mentoring, which you talked about earlier on with Millennials? I mean, how has that played out in terms of helping you scale opportunities? given that you're focusing more on millennials now than you have in the past?
Well, we're also focusing on other targets, of course, but in order to scale, I agree with you, you need to have a vision from the fringes. So we're not looking at beauty as global standard any longer, especially given the attitude of millennials that for them beauty is a mix of things. Everything is blended and blurred, from gender to ethnicity to races to age, as a matter of fact. So by having innovation hubs in very hot spots and understanding what these current beauty ideals are, allowing rapid prototyping, allowing pilots in our freestanding stores, doing, of course, some opportunity assessments, we're allowed to do things quite quickly. And once we see the potential, it gets scaled quite quickly as well. So, I mean, a good example of that, of course, is the brand MAC, which is all races, all genders, all sexes. And this is a very typical example of a millennial attitude. And it went from being a $20 million brand when we bought it to being a multi-billion-dollar brand today.
Right. And the reverse mentoring, because I'm curious, I mean, I think we talked a little bit about it at breakfast, Bruce, I mean, the extent to which that's something that, as you develop the capability in your organization, you build the capability for being more innovative. Is that something that you've looked at specifically, or is that something that you think might work back at the ranch in Colorado?
Well, I think it's more important for it to work here in Europe, because we've got 130 employees in Colorado and almost 40,000 overseas here in Central and Western Europe, and some in Latin America as well. So, but yeah, I mean, there's kind of three primary objectives in the accelerator. One is exposure to a broad landscape of deals. Two is tapping into the startup community and benefiting from the energy and the initiative. Actually, more than three. But third, obviously, we're taking positions in these companies at a higher risk stage. But we've also attracted what we think are the world's top entrepreneurs. But beyond that, internally, we want our teams. This is a big mentorship-driven program. So we've got approximately 35 executives from Virgin Media and a few from Liberty Global who are mentoring these companies. And they're actually being reverse mentored, though I don't think they're truly clear about that. But they're being exposed to lean and agile methodologies, which they've never been exposed to before. And there's learning there that they can take back into their own organizations and business. The last objective for us is this puts us in the business of job creation and new business creation, which I think is very powerful for our brand, not only outward to the consumer, but also our B2B brand and also the brand associated and perceptions we have with our regulatory authorities. Because like your business, we're pretty heavily regulated in all of our countries. And to have that kind of broader exposure and the sentiment that they're benefiting, this company is actually going out of its way to benefit the UK economy and the London economy is very positive for us.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And in terms of, I mean, we talked over breakfast about where your hotspots are. Just, I mean, it seems like there's quite a lot of overlap. I mean, it's the usual suspects of Silicon Valley, London, but then I think you also have South Korea.
Because there's this emergence of what we call K-beauty, where there's an incredible proliferation of new brands, new textures, new actives, new types of makeup, hybridization of different categories. It's a real hotspot for innovation for us.
Right. And then I think your Israel is the other.
Yeah, I mean, Israel is really a very exciting place. I mean, people always ask why being in Silicon Valley and in Israel, and what is the big difference? I mean, Israel has literally no market for rollout. So a lot of ideas are happening there. A lot of it's really the highest density of entrepreneurs and startups in relation to population on Earth. But they have literally no market, no hinterland. Whatever pops up as a good idea needs to be taken out immediately. It needs to search its market. So we have a strong link between our Berlin hub and Israel. we progressively try to connect those guys not for ideation, but for later stage rollout, incubation, acceleration of ideas with the Silicon Valley, which is a completely different ecosystem, as you all know. I mean, it is huge market also for rollout. It is the highest density of let's say, entrepreneurs, of VCs, of big technology companies. And in my point of view, from my perception, it is still very old-fashioned terms of doing business. So whomever you cannot reach within half an hour ride or meet for a coffee to talk about business is really decreasing in interest. And that is completely different in Israel. These guys are very outbound, right?
Yep. So one final question, then perhaps we'll open up for questions from the audience. But I'm an anthropologist by training, so I tend to believe that it's all about culture. And I think I understand there are lots of different tactics that we're using to go out there and identify opportunities, invest in people, build the ecosystem. But long term, it's all, I think, in my mind, it's about building a culture of innovation within your organization. So anything that specifically works or doesn't work in your organizations, I'm curious about your perspective as to whether that is relevant or how relevant that is up against these other activities we've talked about. I mean, do you have a view on this, Bruce?
It's a very high priority for me personally, because I'm an anthropologist by inclination, not by training. But we've got a pretty great culture as a company, and that I think is established from the top level all the way through. So we're fortunate in that regard. But again, the keeping up with the millennial shift, and one of the things we've launched is an internal idea generation engine that we've branded as Spark. And the way I evangelize about it is we really want to tap into the creative genius of our own people. We've got 40,000 people. Many of them want to innovate and have an idea, and this gives them an opportunity for their voice to be heard. And particularly if they're in a management team or a structure where they've got a blocker up above them, this gives them a way to circumvent that and to be heard. And our commitment is that every idea will be viewed and it will be filtered by a subcommittee of some kind. And what happens, we've generated over 13,000 ideas through this platform since we launched it. We now do enterprise-wide campaigns. Our most recent one was one titled Energy 2020, which is all about reducing our carbon footprint and creating energy savings within our entire complex of businesses. And we've generated at this point about 10 million euros a year in savings, and we've got a pipeline of ideas that haven't been implemented that will take that up to 50 million by the end of this year. So it's also a great HR movement, because people really feel as though we value their ideas.
Clearly the expectations are pretty high that we're going to look at every single idea.
Right.
From the others, any comments to that around building the culture of innovation? Lana, do you have a view?
Well, I think as to a lot of companies is based on the idea of innovation, a very entrepreneurial, creativity-driven company. I think the challenge is to harness all of it and to kind of surpass the safety challenges, because we're selling products that people apply on their skin and on their body. So how do you actually accelerate the launch process? Because there are a lot of safety challenges that we face.
But it's also
culture-wise, it's very, very prolific in terms of innovation, in terms of creativity.
Thomas.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it is about the proper mix. I mean, we really know where our gaps are, right? We are 60,000 people company, engineering-driven company. We used to plan stuff for 5 to 10 years. We used to build stuff for 5 to 10 years. We used to operate the stuff for 50 years. And that has strongly determined our view on what is a product cycle, right? And that has to change. So that is, first of all, the cultural challenge, and there is a skills challenge. So we need as skills UX designers, analysts, people who are able to let's say, to develop business right away to roll out. But what we experience is it's really about the mix. I'll give you an example. If you, for example, try to do a proof of concept, a peer-to-peer trading of solar power on the blockchain, only as an example. It helps a lot if you have one, let's say, guy from the established business who has at least a clue how an electron generated gets to the customer and a bill sent after it. If you want to disrupt your business, you also have to know your business. So we need these, let's say, new business designers, but we also know the people who know our value chain.
Yeah. It's a huge tension between maintaining the short-term business and capabilities and also preparing for the future. Yeah. So I think we've got 2 minutes. So any questions from the audience? This is a great panel, I think. Any burning questions based on what we've heard so far? Any responses in particular to the challenge that we shouldn't really be talking about corporate venturing any longer? We should be changing, having a different perspective. And obviously, we've talked a little bit about corporate venturing, but we've gone a little bit off piste here to get into innovation and culture.
Let's all help Jim and take a vote. Who wants to change?
I was going to say this affects us quite personally, so I'm interested. Who wants to see a name change from global corporate venturing to global team innovation?
There you go. That's a quorum. That's a quorum, okay. I think, James. Yeah.
And who thinks we should just set up a second title called Global Team Innovation? None? And okay, who thinks we should keep with global corporate venturing?
And there's
a lot of people out there that didn't vote. Come on.
That's pretty passive. This was a great session, a great highlight for us. So Bruce, I might well pick your brains on this actually going forward. But please join me in thanking Mark.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much.